Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session focuses on sociolinguistic competence and language choice. I hope and expect that this session would further deepen your understanding of the concept of sociolinguistic competence and how does it relate to making certain language choices in certain situations. Well, my dear students, the idea of sociolinguistic competence relates back to Chomsky's idea of generative grammar or the theory of generative grammar. Chomsky basically presented the idea of linguistic competence, and to him the idea of linguistic competence is the knowledge of the rules of grammar and the understanding of the structures of a language. And what Chomsky said about that was that having the knowledge of the rules of grammar and is linguistic competence, and when it is applied to the use, actual use in language, that is linguistic performance. When we compare with that the idea of sociolinguistic competence does not restrict the knowledge of a language to the rules of language only. It also deals with the knowledge of the rules of using that language by the people who use it, by the society. Thus, it takes into consideration the cultural values and attitudes towards that language into consideration. So, levels of formality, style, register choices, and how, there are different attitudes of different groups of people or different societies towards that. All this is taken into consideration. Now, with all this sociolinguistic competence, having the knowledge of the rules of language plus the knowledge of the rules of the society to use that language, this is the stage where comes the performance of language. So, sociolinguistic performance is actually performing language, that is using language for social interactions by using sociolinguistic competence, that is by using both the social as well as the linguistic rules of the use of that language. Well, my dear students, when it comes to practical applications, I would just like to share one quick example from the context of the UK and from the context of Pakistan. For example, in a context where, you are a guest to somebody, let us suppose a situation where, this person X goes from Pakistan to the UK. And there he meets his guest, let's suppose, who is a professor at a university. And the professor there offers this person X tea and asks, would you like to have a cup of tea? This person X says, thank you. Now, as far as the grammaticality of all this is concerned, this is perfectly okay. But, the professor would be confused. And why the professor would be confused? Because according to the UK culture, it is made very clear when somebody asks, would you like to have a cup of tea? The other person would either say, yes, thank you, or would say, no, thank you. Only thank you is not enough because it leaves ambiguity with the idea of whether you are accepting the offer or you are not accepting the offer. But, the person who has gone from Pakistan would not understand that if he does not understand the social operating procedures of English language in the UK society. Because his knowledge would be rooted in a different culture, that is the Pakistani culture, where what we call takalluf. We are very formal. And, when somebody would ask for tea, we would immediately say thank you, which means actually no thank you. This thank you does not mean yes, thank you. So there is no confusion in the Pakistani context. But, when the culture changes, the sociolinguistic performance of this person X is affected because the sociolinguistic competence, that is the knowledge of the language as well as the social rules, when we come to that, the knowledge of the rules of language was there, yes, but there was no knowledge of the use of those rules of language in that particular society. Well, my dear students, I am going to show you another example of how does it operate. Well, if you look at the screen, in a very humorous way here, the artist has illustrated how language is used, differently in different cultures. For example, if you look here, this person flying with the help of a rope, says, okay, how do you do? My name is Tarzan, and I believe we are known as Jane. So, this person is getting ready, to meet a person from some other culture, is climbing, from one tree to the other. So, as this person climbs, holding the branches of one tree, is trying to go to the other tree, says, in this one, number 2, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. And you? Look at the third one, now he's almost jumping. And what does he say? You must be Jane. I'm Tarzan. It's a pleasure to meet you. And finally, after this one, he lands on the other tree, the branch of other tree, and says, there she is. And practically what happens, he's preparing a lot, through these 4 slides as it is shown. He's preparing a lot in his head. He is using all his knowledge of language to create different sentences, how he would introduce himself as he would go there. And practically when he goes there, he reaches there in this 5-1. He is unable to use, all that he has thought of this. And practically what he does is, he says, me, Tarzan, you, Jane. So, this one shows his disappointment. So, I hope with the help of this slideshow, you understand how a lot of times when we move from one culture to the other culture, a lot of disappointment is faced because we are unable to translate, our linguistic use in accordance with the social and the cultural norms of that society. And also, even if we know the rules, we are not able to perform them. Well, my dear students, sociolinguistic competence is the knowledge and ability thus to use language appropriately in any given social context, including the awareness of the politeness strategies of the target language and the culture where you are using it. You have to make all those choices very carefully. Sociolinguistic competence and making language choices according to that means a lot of things. Knowing the taboos of that culture, knowing the address forms of that culture, how people are addressed in that culture. Knowing different registers, how they differ from each other. Knowing the process of turn-taking, not being impatient and jumping into that, not being too delayed to pick up your turn, etc. Knowing when to speak and knowing also when to remain silent. So these are different aspects of sociolinguistic competence and language choices in relation to different cultures.